We communicate with ourselves and others via both verbal and nonverbal communication. Before we spend our time discussing verbal communication or language, let's quickly distinguish between these two communication codes. A check of the World English Dictionary shows that verbal means words, so verbal communication deals with language. By adding non as a prefix to verbal, you'll quickly see that nonverbal is everything but the words, including your tone of voice when you actually say the words. The words we use, our language, communicate multiple messages. We use words to communicate content, emotions, status, reactions. A tremendous amount of information is communicated through words. As British writer Giles Lytton Strachey observed, perhaps of all of the creations of man, language is the most astonishing. However, many times we don't think about the impact our words have on others as well as on ourselves. We often just blurt out words without, thinking about it. Let's start off today by defining language, and then we'll focus on what words mean, specifically the denotative and connotative meaning of words, and a hypothesis that helps us understand how our language affects our perceptions, the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, also called the principle of linguistic relativity. What is language really? To put it in academic terms, language is a system of symbols structured by rules and patterns that is common to a community of people. A symbol is a word, sound, gesture, or visual image that stands for something else, like a thought, concept, object, or experience. Specific to language, symbols are words, or the vocabulary that you use to communicate your meaning to someone else. These symbols are structured by rules and standards, grammar, and patterns dictating how the words are arranged, or syntax. You will see that this last phrase in the definition, that are common to a community of people, is important when we discuss the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It helps us understand the importance of language in how we perceive and create the world around us. Some of you already know the two different types of meanings that words have, denotative and connotative. The denotative meaning of the word is the primary association that word has for most members in a given linguistic community. You may have heard this referred to as the dictionary definition. In comparison, connotative meaning is the other or secondary association of the word. Sometimes we call this the emotional appeal or the feelings evoked by a particular word. Now, the easiest of the two is the denotative meaning, the primary association. If you don't know the meaning of the word, look it up in the dictionary, right? However, many words have multiple meanings. In fact, the 500 most common American words have altogether about 14,000 different definitions in the dictionary. Here's an example of a very simple three-letter word, set. If you look it up on dictionary.com, there are 119 different definitions listed. With this many definitions, the meaning will come from the context. Now let's consider another common three-letter word, dog. Dictionary.com's definition is any carnivore of the dog family Canidae, having prominent canine teeth and, in the wild state, a long and slender muzzle, a deep-chested muscular body, a bushy tail, and large erect ears. Amongst the list of 25 other definitions, I also found a despicable man or youth and an iron bar driven into a stone or timber to provide a means of lifting it. You can also use it as a verb, as in, she is dogging me. So you can't just gather the meaning of the word by looking in the dictionary. But if you're like me, if you think about the word dog, you think of your dog. Not only do I envision my daughter's service dog, Rennick, but I have warm feelings when I think of him, very positive feelings. I could also argue that the word dog, referring to a despicable man or youth, has an emotion attached to it, in this case, a negative emotion. These secondary meanings and feelings comprise the connotative meaning. Let me give you another example. When my daughter Rachel was 6 years old, we went to Costco, which is a big box warehouse store, and bought the Chronicles of Narnia, all 7 books in a single volume. Everything you buy at Costco is big, so this book was very thick. She took the book to school, and her preschool teacher looked at it and said, "Wow, that's a fat book." Rachel started crying, saying, "It is not fat. Don't call it fat." Her teacher used the word fat appropriately in a denotative context, meaning big, broad, or extended, thick. However, Rachel had somehow learned the connotative meaning that fat is bad, and that may never have been said directly. It could have been communicated nonverbally. If I had walked around the house patting my belly, saying with a negative tone and a disgusted expression, "Boy, am I getting fat," she learns the connotative meaning along with the denotative meaning. Communication scholar I.A. Richards coined the phrase, "Meanings are in people, not words." Not only does this emphasize that words are symbols that stand for something else, but that it is humans who supply the meaning of words. Let me give you an example. In 1999, the Washington Post reported a story about the Washington, D.C. mayor accepting the resignation of staff member David Howard. In a discussion, Mr. Howard used the word niggardly to express how he was going to have to manage a fund's tight budget. The dictionary defines the word as meaning miserly or stingy and has nothing to do with race. However, one of the participants in the meeting objected to its use, believing the word was a racial slur. Well, that leads us to the 4 axioms of language development that guide the meanings that people give to and receive from the words they use. The first is that the meaning of words is arbitrary. The use of given words to represent objects, ideas, feelings, and actions is the result of the preferences of the person or persons who use the words the first time. A table, for example, doesn't scream out, "I am a table." The word table was chosen the first time arbitrarily, at random. It could just as easily have been called a mesa, as it is called in Spanish, or even something nonsensical such as nano. But if everyone used their own arbitrary words, there would be mass confusion. When a large number of individuals agree upon a particular word, then the meaning of the word becomes conventional. Note that conventional means that a large number of people agree on the meaning of a word. That helps explain why cultures have different languages, and even why cultures who share the same language still have different words or conventions, leading George Bernard Shaw to observe that England and America are 2 countries separated by a common language, in this case English. And the meaning of words is learned, meaning that we are not born with an innate knowledge of our words. Each generation must learn the language anew. And finally, the meaning of words and perception are interrelated, meaning they affect each other. Perception then affects language, and language affects perception. You can see how perception affects language. If you encounter a situation or object that you have no word in your vocabulary to describe it, you are likely to either form a new word or use an old word in a new way to describe the situation or object, such as when you see something that looks like this for the first time. You need to come up with a word to describe it because you don't want to have to point to it every time you talk about it. So you use a word that you already have in your vocabulary and call it a mouse. Arbitrary becomes conventional. Others learn it. And because you perceive it, a new word or meaning has been added to your vocabulary. Then even when the item evolves, losing its tail and changing shape, it still is the convention to call it a mouse. Now let's focus a little bit more on how language affects perception, which will lead us to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This concept was developed in 1949 by Edward Sapir and then expounded on by one of his students, Benjamin Lee Whorf, hence the name Sapir-Whorf. The basic concept here is that the language you have in your brain, in your thoughts, actually controls your thought system. The language causes you to see things a certain way, and if you have no words for a concept, you might not even perceive it. Sometimes called the principle of linguistic relativity, or the Whorfian hypothesis, this concept says that language shapes or influences our thoughts and culture, and our culture and thoughts affect the language we use to describe what we perceive. Another way to view this is that your perception of reality is affected by the language system that controls your thought system. The most popular example is from the Inuit language, which is the language of the Aboriginal people of the Arctic. They have a large number of words to describe snow, with each word describing a different type of snow. The theory is that because of this, the Inuits were able to discern or perceive differences in snow that others, without the multitude of words, could not. This example has come under attack when scholars questioned whether having a single word describing fluffy falling snow really affected perceptions more than having 3 words that said the same thing. Another example comes from the comic strip Frank and Ernest by Bob Thaves. I can't show you the comic because of copyright concerns. But in this comic, 2 cavemen are talking to each other, and one says, "Yeah, I'm worried all the time too. I wish we had never invented the future tense." The point is that if we didn't have the language that allowed us to realize that the future existed, then we wouldn't even think about it. Regardless, it shows that not all languages can be translated to each other, and that language is relative. Even the same word can have different meanings to different people. Let me give you a personal example. I have 2 children, 2 lovely daughters. To me, they will always be my children, and that is the word that's in my vocabulary, even when they are 30 years old. Even adding the word adult doesn't take away the thoughts that result from my language. I have adult children. The point is that no matter how old they get, I will always view them and treat them as children. The bottom line is that language influences thought, which influences perception. Quiz time here. What would be a denotative meaning of the word home? What impact does connotative meaning have on the success of your spoken as well as your written word? And what does meanings are in people, not words, mean? Now that you understand that each word has multiple meanings, perhaps you can be more effective when you communicate with language with other people.